Hi everybody, here I am for the last installment of Correll's Woods Ecosystem. So this is our last class, I guess you could call it. You guys have made it to the end of this crazy school year, for science anyway. Today's my last lesson for you, and I thought I would wrap up the last two chapters that I had you read, continuing with ecosystems and cycles and food webs. And so I thought it would be fitting to come down here to the woods again. So here we are at the stream ecosystem. See all the insects on there, those little water striders? They're part of that water ecosystem. Over here in the forest ecosystem, the community is all the trees, all the grass, all the different plants. I just saw 2 squirrels, tons of birds. We do have a little fawn in our woods. We saw that yesterday. There's some coyotes. We hear those a lot. We've seen fox, lots of rabbits. So remember, the ecosystem is all the living and the non-living. The community is all of the different populations of biotic. Some of the abiotic, the water, the rocks, the air. So let's talk a little bit about food webs. Okay, so food webs. What's the base of every food web? Look around. Look at all the green plants. And then whatever eats the plants are producers. Whatever eats the plants, those are heterotrophs. Plants, another name for producers, are autotrophs because they make their own food. So the heterotrophs can be herbivores that just eat the plants, omnivores that eat plants and animals, or carnivores that just eat animals. So of the populations of biotic that I talked about just a second ago, in our food web, the coyotes would eat the deer and the rabbits. The deer eat grass and other berries and plants, and so do the rabbits. So, and then there's the squirrels that also eat the nuts and things that are growing in the forest. So put all that together, and there's your food web. In the last unit, it talked about flow of energy, and I thought, wow, that's really cool, because we started off this whole crazy, having to teach from home, and I gave you an assignment about writing a CER for the law of conservation of energy, how energy flows through a food chain and is not lost, because there's a law of science. And that's the exact same thing we're going to end with. So when I look around at the different food webs, the energy flows from the sun to the plants to the heterotrophs, and all of those organisms use that energy to power their body, to make seeds, to reproduce, to go get food. So when that happens, the last stage of any life is, well, things die. Look at these dead trees over here. Oh, look at the stump back here. It's covered with moss and lichen and fungus. There's some mushrooms growing out of it. those are decomposers. Those break it down to put the nutrients back into the soil. So there's our food web and our food chain and our flow of energy. And lastly, cycles. So cycles, not only is it the law of conservation of energy, it's also the law of conservation of mass. Oftentimes it's called the law of conservation of mass / energy because neither one can be created or destroyed. They just cycle through. Well, we know what it means for energy. Energy from the sun powers all of the life on Earth. What about law of conservation of mass? What does that mean? Well, this water is made of hydrogen and oxygen. Those are elements, and those can't be created. So all of the elements, all of the things that are on this planet are here, and they have been here for all time. What the heck does that mean? Well, when this stream, when the water evaporates, the water goes up into the atmosphere, and then when it goes from liquid to gas by evaporation, it gets up into the atmosphere, and if enough water vapor is in the atmosphere, it condenses. So it gets heavier and it clumps together and it makes droplets, and those droplets then fall to the earth in the form of precipitation. That runs off back into the streams, down into the groundwater, and it gives water to all the living organisms on our planet. That's the water cycle. What about the other important nutrients? So 98% of all life is made of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. We're not going to talk much about phosphorus and sulfur, but we know what water is. We just talked about hydrogen and oxygen, water, and how it cycles. What about carbon? Carbon makes up all living things. All living things. You are a carbon-based organism. All plants, carbon-based organisms. So we've talked about photosynthesis. When these plants take in the sunlight and carbon dioxide from us, so we breathe out carbon dioxide, plants take it in, and they make glucose, C6H12O6, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Then a heterotroph, eats that plant and gets those carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens in their body and uses it to make structure, for energy. Then when something like that tree dies, that carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen gets broken down by decomposers and put back into the soil, so a new plant can use those things to grow. So, photosynthesis, cellular respiration, that's part of the carbon cycle. We breathe out carbon dioxide, plants use it to make glucose, C6H12O6, and they breathe out oxygen. We breathe in oxygen, and then we do cellular respiration, and we breathe out carbon dioxide. The carbon cycle. That glucose, remember, gets used to build structure. When something dies, it goes back to the soil. Decomposers, bacteria, fungi, break it down, put it back into the soil for new organisms to grow. Nitrogen cycle, same thing. Most of the air is nitrogen. 78% of the air is nitrogen. Have you ever noticed that after the first lightning storm in the spring, the grass turns bright green the very next day? That's because the lightning has so much energy, it can take the nitrogen that's in the atmosphere and turn it into nitrogen that plants use for food. So that grass immediately gets some new food and it starts to green up and grow and do photosynthesis. The nitrogen cycle. When things die, or when the deer, see if I can find some deer poop. When the deer poop on the ground, they poop out and they pee out ammonia, which is nitrogen. And so that defecation gets converted into usable forms of fertilizer for plants. In the springtime, a lot of people put weed and feed on their yards. Part of that feed is nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Plants need those to make their structure. Humans need those too. That's what builds our muscles. So when we eat that hamburger, we're also getting nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur from the animal that we ate that may have eaten a green plant. And so we get those elements so that we can build our structure. Okay, what about, oh, here's some good fungus. Look at that stuff. There's some good decomposers. Breaking up that dead log. Okay, so what about if something upsets a food web like this? Remember my last video I talked about that green plant with the pretty little white flowers? Well, this is called an invasive species. This is garlic mustard. And it's an invasive species. It needs to get pulled up. See how it's got the little runners? It can grow from one plant to another. It needs to get pulled up and you need to take it out. Because it's an invasive species is something that is new to an environment and it doesn't have any predators. So it takes over quickly. It reproduces rapidly and takes over quickly. Well, it chokes out other organisms, and so it becomes it's a nuisance. Now, look at it all. Look at how quickly it takes over. I don't think this was here last summer. What you should do, if you have any garlic mustard, they say you have to pull it up. It pulls up super duper easy. And you have to put it in a garbage bag. If you leave it lay on the ground like this, that won't do it. It'll still reproduce. So, invasive species, food webs, food chain. How's a food chain different from a food web? A food web contains all the different feeding relationships. A food chain is just a single one. Another invasive species, if you go to the Mississippi River, are those carp that jump when the boat goes by. They jump out of the water. They're not quite by Bagley yet, but hopefully they don't get that far. That's another invasive species. And it takes food away from other organisms that live in that ecosystem, reproduces rapidly, so it uses all of the nutrients available for it, and it chokes out other organisms. All right. And then cycles. The water cycle, the carbon cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. So, hopefully, this kind of helps you to understand what you read about in the textbook. And your very last assignment, what I would like to see you do is make a poster of one of the cycles. I don't care if you do the water cycle, the carbon cycle, or the nitrogen cycle, and it can be as, you know, a small little piece of paper, like a sheet of computer paper is fine. And in that cycle, in your cycle somewhere, I would like you to include a food web. So you're going to have an ecosystem, because if you're talking about the different cycles, you're going to be talking about ecosystems. So include a food web, a cycle, and how energy flows through that cycle. So we started off with that. Let's end with that. And I will also put a rubric on with this video. Remember, this is your last assignment. This won't be due until next week. Then you guys are done with school. You're done with school at the end of this week. How crazy is that? And if you get a chance, go out and pull up some of this garlic mustard and get rid of those invasive species. Okay, well, guys, it was an honor teaching you. I enjoyed your class so much. I really super wish we could have been together every day in our classroom and talked more about science. Get outside. If you want, take a video. Instead of doing a poster, do a video like I did. Hope everybody doesn't do that, though. That's a lot of videos to watch. All right. Well, like I said, it's been an honor. I really miss you guys. I wish you luck next year as 8th graders. Have a great summer. I hope we get this thing figured out and we can get back to our school building. But school's kind of like church. Look around. You can go outside and learn all about science too. All right. I miss you guys. Have a great summer. And I'll see you next year as 8th graders. Bye.